In the heart of Manhattan, where skyscrapers touched the clouds and life moved at a pace faster than most could handle, there was an office building that buzzed with activity. Inside this corporate maze, hundreds of people worked tirelessly, typing, on keyboards, attending back-to-back meetings, and rushing to meet deadlines. Amid all this chaos, one man went unnoticed. He wasn't flashy or loud. Instead, he preferred to stay in the background, quietly doing his job. This man was the janitor. Tall, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, he carried himself with dignity, despite his humble role. Every day he cleaned the floors, emptied trash bins, and wiped down desks without complaining. Most employees barely acknowledged him as they passed by. To them, he was just another faceless worker whose name they didn't bother to learn. But little did anyone know, this quiet man had a secret, one that would soon turn everyone's world upside down. One morning, things were unusually hectic. The CEO of the company, a sharp-dressed man in his late 40s, had returned from a business trip overseas. His schedule was packed, and today was no exception. There was an important video conference happening in the boardroom, a meeting with clients from different parts of the globe. Representatives from France, China, Russia, and several other countries were joining the call, making communication tricky. The company had hired professional translators for the occasion, but something went wrong almost immediately. One translator struggled to understand the nuances of Mandarin, while another couldn't quite grasp the tone needed for Russian negotiations. Frustration filled the air as misunderstandings piled up. The CEO, already stressed from jet lag and the pressure of sealing deals worth millions, stepped out of the room to clear his head. As he walked down the hallway, still wearing his suit jacket but loosening his tie, he spotted the janitor nearby. The man was mopping the floor, seemingly unfazed by the commotion coming from the boardroom. Feeling the need to vent, the CEO stopped and began talking aloud about how chaotic everything was. "I don't know what we're going to do," he muttered. "We've got these brilliant opportunities, but if we can't even communicate properly, it's all going to fall apart." The janitor paused mid-mop and looked up. With a polite smile, he said softly, "If you'd like, I could help." The CEO blinked, surprised not only by the offer but also by the accentless French that came out of the man's mouth. For a moment, he thought he might have imagined it. "Wait, what?" he asked, leaning closer. "I speak French," the janitor replied simply, switching back to English. "And a few other languages, too." Curiosity piqued, the CEO pressed further. "How many languages do you actually speak?" The janitor hesitated for a second, then answered matter-of-factly, 9. 9? The CEO nearly choked on his own breath. "Which ones?" Without missing a beat, the janitor listed them off: English, French, Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, Swahili, Portuguese, and German. For a moment, the CEO stood frozen, trying to process what he'd just heard. Here was a man who cleaned floors for a living, yet he spoke 9 languages fluently. It seemed impossible, like something out of a movie. But the sincerity in the janitor's voice made it clear he wasn't joking. Desperate and running out of options, the CEO decided to take a leap of faith. "Come with me," he said, gesturing toward the boardroom. The janitor hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of stepping into such a high-stakes situation. But after a reassuring nod from the CEO, he set aside his mop and followed. When they entered the room, all eyes turned to the unexpected guest. Some attendees looked confused, others skeptical. Who was this man in casual clothes, standing among executives in tailored suits? Before anyone could ask, the janitor stepped forward and began speaking, in fluent French. Then, seamlessly, he switched to Mandarin when addressing the Chinese representatives. Next came Arabic, followed by Russian. Each transition was smooth, each sentence perfectly articulated. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. What had started as a tense, disjointed conversation transformed into a productive discussion. Clients who had previously been frustrated now nodded approvingly, impressed by the clarity and respect shown in their native tongues. Even the company's own team members exchanged astonished glances, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. By the time the meeting wrapped up, the mood was lighter, and smiles replaced scowls. Deals that had seemed shaky earlier were now solidified, thanks largely to the janitor's efforts. As the call ended, the CEO turned to the man and shook his hand firmly. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. "You saved us today." The janitor smiled modestly, brushing off the praise. "Just doing my part," he replied. But the CEO wasn't satisfied with leaving it at that. He wanted to know more. How had this man learned so many languages? Why? Was he working as a janitor? And most importantly, why had no one noticed his incredible talent before? Later that afternoon, the CEO invited the janitor to join him for lunch in a quiet cafe near the office. Over sandwiches and coffee, the janitor opened up about his life. Born and raised in a modest neighborhood, he developed a love for languages early on. Books, online courses, and conversations with people from diverse backgrounds became his teachers. Despite his passion and dedication, financial struggles forced him to take whatever jobs he could find to make ends meet. Cleaning offices wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Listening intently, the CEO felt a mix of emotions: awe, guilt, and inspiration. Awe at the man's accomplishments, guilt for not recognizing his potential sooner, and inspiration to do something meaningful with this discovery. Little did either of them know, this chance encounter would spark a chain reaction that would change both their lives forever. Back at the office, whispers spread like wildfire. Employees who had once ignored the janitor now looked at him with newfound admiration. Some felt embarrassed for underestimating him, while others were genuinely excited to have witnessed such an incredible story unfold. Whatever their feelings, one thing was certain: the quiet man who cleaned floors had just become the talk of the entire company. The lunch meeting between the CEO and the janitor turned into something deeper than either of them had expected. As they sat in the quiet cafe, sipping coffee and sharing stories, the janitor opened up about his life in a way he hadn't done with anyone in years. He spoke about growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce but dreams were plenty. His grandmother, who raised him after his parents passed away, was the one who first introduced him to languages. She used to tell him stories in Swahili, her native tongue, and encouraged him to learn as much as he could about the world beyond their small community. "I didn't have fancy schools or tutors," he said with a soft chuckle, "but I had books. Lots of them. Libraries became my second home. And later, when the internet came around, it opened up a whole new world for me." He explained how he spent countless hours teaching himself through free online resources. He'd listen to podcasts, watch movies without subtitles, and practice speaking with people from different countries at local cultural events. Over time, he became fluent in 9 languages, not because it was easy, but because he loved it. Languages weren't just tools for communication. They were bridges that connected him to people, cultures, and ideas he might never have encountered otherwise. The CEO listened intently, his expression shifting from surprise to admiration. Here was a man who had achieved something remarkable despite facing obstacles most people couldn't even imagine. Yet instead of bitterness or resentment, the janitor radiated humility and gratitude. It was clear that he didn't see himself as extraordinary. He simply did what he loved, regardless of the circumstances. As the conversation continued, the CEO couldn't help but ask the question that had been lingering in his mind. "Why are you working here? As a janitor, I mean?" The janitor paused, looking down at his coffee cup for a moment before answering. "Life doesn't always give you choices," he said quietly. "I tried applying for jobs where I could use my skills, but no one took me seriously. They saw my resume and assumed I wasn't qualified, so I took whatever work I could find. Cleaning floors isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills. And honestly, I don't mind it. It's honest work." His words hit the CEO like a punch to the gut. For all the talk about diversity and inclusion in corporate boardrooms, here was living proof that the system was broken. A man with 9 languages under his belt, someone who could navigate complex international negotiations with ease, was stuck mopping floors because society had failed to recognize his value. By the time they finished their meal, the CEO knew he had to do something. He couldn't let this man's talent go to waste any longer. But he also realized that making such a drastic change wouldn't be easy. People were creatures of habit, and introducing someone from outside the traditional hierarchy would undoubtedly ruffle feathers. Still, he felt a responsibility, not just to the janitor, but to the company as a whole. When they returned to the office, the CEO called an emergency meeting with his senior leadership team. The room was tense as everyone gathered around the table, wondering why they'd been summoned so suddenly. When the CEO explained what had happened during the international call and shared the janitor's story, reactions were mixed. Some executives nodded thoughtfully, clearly impressed by the man's abilities. Others frowned, skeptical about the idea of promoting someone from such a low-level position. One vice president leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Are we really going to bring a janitor into the executive fold?" he asked bluntly. "What message does that send to everyone else? That hard work and climbing the ladder don't matter anymore?" The CEO sighed, understanding the concerns but refusing to back down. "This isn't about skipping steps," he replied firmly. "It's about recognizing potential wherever it exists. If we're serious about innovation and growth, we can't afford to overlook talent just because it doesn't come wrapped in a fancy degree or a polished resume." He went on to explain his plan. A 3-month trial period during which the janitor would take on a new role as a translator and cultural liaison officer. If he proved himself capable, he would officially join the executive team responsible for overseeing global operations. The decision wasn't unanimous, but the CEO's determination won out in the end. Later that day, the janitor was called into the CEO's office. Nervously, he stepped inside, unsure of what to expect. The CEO greeted him warmly and laid out the proposal. At first, the janitor looked stunned, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You want me to do this?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Yes," the CEO said with a reassuring smile. "You've already shown us what you're capable of. Now it's time to see how far you can go." The janitor hesitated, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the opportunity. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Stepping into a role like this meant leaving behind the comfort of anonymity and facing scrutiny from colleagues who might not accept him. But deep down, he also knew he couldn't pass up the chance to make a difference. "I'll do it," he finally said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him. "But I need your support. This won't be easy for either of us." The CEO nodded, his respect for the man growing even more. "You'll have it," he promised. "We're in this together." Word of the decision spread quickly throughout the office. Reactions varied wildly. Some employees were thrilled, seeing it as a long overdue acknowledgement of the janitor's talents. Others were skeptical, questioning whether he truly belonged in such a high-profile position. Whispers echoed in hallways and break rooms, speculating about how this bold move would play out. Despite the mixed reception, the janitor approached his new role with determination. On his first day in the translator's office, he arrived early, dressed in a freshly pressed suit borrowed from a friend. Though he still felt out of place among the polished executives, he carried himself with quiet confidence. After all, he reminded himself, he'd faced tougher challenges before, and he'd always found a way to rise above them. Over the next few weeks, he threw himself into the work, proving his worth time and again. Whether it was mediating tense negotiations or helping bridge cultural misunderstandings, he handled every task with grace and professionalism. Slowly but surely, even the skeptics began to see that this wasn't just a fluke. He genuinely belonged there. But the journey was far from over. Challenges lay ahead, both personal and professional. The janitor knew that earning trust and respect would take time, especially in a world that often judged people based on appearances rather than abilities. Yet he remained undeterred, driven by the belief that everyone deserved a fair shot at success. As the days turned into months, the ripple effects of the CEO's decision began to reshape the company in ways no one could have predicted. What started as a simple act of recognition soon blossomed into a movement, a reminder that greatness can come from anywhere, and true leadership means giving people the chance to shine. The janitor's first few weeks in his new role were a whirlwind of activity. Every morning he woke up earlier than usual, his mind racing with thoughts about the day ahead. He spent hours preparing for meetings, brushing up on industry terms in different languages and studying cultural nuances to ensure he didn't make any missteps. Despite his confidence in his language skills, he knew this job required more than just speaking fluently. It demanded diplomacy, patience, and an ability to navigate tricky situations without causing offense. On his very first assignment, he was tasked with helping the company close a deal with a major client from Russia. The negotiations had been dragging on for months, bogged down by misunderstandings and mistrust. When the janitor walked into the conference room, some of the executives exchanged skeptical glances. They weren't sure how someone who had been cleaning floors just weeks ago could handle such a high-stakes situation. But as soon as he began speaking, in perfect Russian, the atmosphere shifted. He didn't just translate words, he bridged gaps. Where previous translators had struggled to convey tone or intent, he effortlessly captured the subtleties of both sides. When the Russian representatives expressed frustration, he didn't just relay their words, he explained the underlying concerns behind them. And when the company's team pushed back, he softened their responses to avoid escalating tensions. By the end of the meeting, not only had they reached an agreement, but the two parties were actually laughing and shaking hands like old friends. Word of his success spread quickly. Other departments started reaching out, asking for his help with everything from contract disputes to marketing campaigns aimed at international audiences. What surprised everyone, even the CEO, was how much more effective communication became when someone truly understood the cultures involved. It wasn't just about getting the grammar right. It was about showing respect and building trust. But not everyone was thrilled about the change. Some senior staff members felt threatened by the janitor's sudden rise. One manager in particular, a woman known for her sharp tongue and rigid adherence to corporate hierarchy, made no secret of her disapproval. During a team meeting, she openly questioned whether someone without formal education could really contribute at this level. Her comments drew murmurs of agreement from a few colleagues, though many others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure how to respond. Instead of reacting defensively, the janitor took a different approach. After the meeting, he approached the manager privately and thanked her for voicing her concerns. "I understand why you might have doubts," he said calmly. "This is a big change and I'm still learning. If there's anything specific you think I can improve on, I'd appreciate your feedback." His humility caught her off guard. For a moment she looked flustered, as if she hadn't expected him to be so gracious. But then she softened slightly and admitted that her main concern was ensuring the company maintained its reputation. "It's not personal," she added almost apologetically. From that point on, the janitor made a conscious effort to collaborate with her. Whenever possible, he sought her input on projects, recognizing that her expertise in certain areas complemented his own. Over time, her hostility faded, replaced by a grudging respect and eventually genuine admiration for his professionalism and willingness to listen. As the trial period progressed, the janitor continued to prove himself invaluable. Beyond his linguistic abilities, he brought something else to the table: empathy. Unlike many executives who focused solely on numbers and results, he took the time to understand people's perspectives. When an intern confided in him about feeling overwhelmed by the fast-paced environment, he offered practical advice based on his own experiences. When a mid-level manager struggled to resolve a conflict with a foreign partner, he stepped in to mediate, using his knowledge of both language and culture to find common ground. Employees began seeking him out not just for translation work, but also for guidance on personal challenges. Whether it was navigating workplace politics or dealing with self-doubt, he had a way of making people feel seen and heard. His office, which had once been empty except for cleaning supplies, became a safe space where anyone could drop by for a chat. Even those who had initially dismissed him as just a janitor now saw him as a mentor and ally. Of course, the transition wasn't without its difficulties. There were days when the pressure felt overwhelming, especially when he faced criticism from colleagues who resented his rapid ascent. Some accused him of being handed opportunities they had worked years to earn, while others whispered that he wouldn't last long in such a demanding role. These comments stung, but he refused to let them define him. Instead, he channeled his energy into proving his worth through action rather than words. One particularly challenging moment came during a high-profile event hosted by the company. Representatives from over 20 countries had gathered to discuss potential partnerships, and tensions ran high. Misunderstandings erupted left and right, threatening to derail the entire evening. The janitor moved between groups, calming nerves and clarifying points until the chaos subsided. By the end of the night, the CEO pulled him aside and said, "You saved us again. I don't know what we'd do without you." Though grateful for the praise, the janitor remained humble. "It's a team effort," he replied. "I'm just doing my part." By the time the 3-month trial period ended, there was no question about whether he had succeeded. Revenue from international deals had skyrocketed, employee morale had improved, and the company's reputation as a global leader had grown stronger than ever. The board unanimously agreed to promote him to a permanent position within the executive team, making him the first person from a non-traditional background to hold such a title. The announcement sent shockwaves through the office. For some, it was a source of inspiration, a reminder that hard work and talent could open doors even in the most unlikely places. For others, it was a wake-up call, forcing them to confront their biases and reconsider what true leadership looked like. And for the janitor himself, it was validation, not just of his abilities, but of the belief that everyone deserves a chance to shine. Looking back on those early days, he often thought about how far he'd come. From mopping floors to sitting at the executive table, his journey had been anything but ordinary. But what mattered most to him wasn't the title or the recognition, it was the impact he'd been able to make. By breaking down barriers and challenging stereotypes, he had shown that greatness knows no boundaries. And as he settled into his new role, he vowed to continue fighting for a world where opportunities are based on merit, not assumptions. Little did he know, his story was only beginning. With his promotion now official, the janitor turned executive settled into his new role with a mix of excitement and nerves. He knew he had proven himself during the trial period, but stepping fully into the executive team meant facing even bigger challenges and higher expectations. The spotlight was brighter than ever, and every decision he made would be scrutinized not just by his colleagues, but by the entire company. At first, some people still struggled to adjust to the idea of seeing him in such a high-level position. Old habits die hard, and it wasn't uncommon for someone to accidentally address him as the janitor instead of using his new title. Each time it happened, there was an awkward pause, followed by hurried apologies. But rather than getting upset, he simply smiled and said, "It's okay. I haven't forgotten where I came from." That response became one of his trademarks, a way of reminding everyone that no matter how far he climbed, he remained grounded in who he was. It also helped ease tensions among those who worried he might grow distant or arrogant after his promotion. Instead, he stayed approachable, often stopping to chat with employees at all levels, whether they were interns or senior managers. One of his earliest initiatives as part of the executive team was to push for better communication practices across the company. Drawing on his own experiences, he argued that misunderstandings weren't just frustrating. They could cost the business millions in lost deals and damaged relationships. To tackle this issue, he proposed creating a dedicated language and culture training program for employees working on international projects. The idea was met with enthusiasm, but implementing it wasn't easy. Developing the curriculum required input from experts in multiple fields, and convincing busy executives to allocate time and resources took patience and persistence. Through it all, he led by example, attending workshops alongside junior staff members and encouraging open discussions about cultural differences. His presence in these sessions sent a powerful message: learning never stops no matter how successful you become. As the months went by, the impact of his work became undeniable. Teams that had previously struggled to collaborate across borders began functioning more smoothly. Employees reported feeling more confident when interacting with international clients, knowing they had the tools and support needed to succeed. Even small gestures like greeting partners in their native languages or observing local customs during meetings helped build stronger connections and foster trust. But perhaps the most surprising change was the shift in workplace culture. Before his promotion, the office had been divided by invisible lines: executives on one side, mid-level managers in the middle, and frontline workers like cleaners and receptionists on the bottom rung. Now, thanks to his example, those barriers started breaking down. People from different departments began mingling more freely, sharing ideas and insights without worrying about hierarchy. Conversations that once felt stiff and formal grew warmer and more authentic. This transformation didn't happen overnight, though. There were moments of resistance along the way. Some longtime employees resented the changes, viewing them as unnecessary disruptions to the status quo. A few even accused him of trying to change too much, too fast. When confronted with such criticism, he listened patiently and then explained his reasoning calmly. "I'm not here to tear anything down," he'd say. "I'm here to build something better for all of us." His words resonated with many, especially younger employees eager for fresh perspectives. They saw him as a symbol of hope, proof that talent and determination could overcome even the toughest obstacles. Inspired by his journey, several individuals began advocating for similar opportunities within the company. One young IT specialist, who had grown up speaking 3 languages but rarely used them professionally, approached him for advice on how to showcase her skills. With his encouragement, she volunteered to assist with international tech support projects and quickly earned recognition for her contributions. Meanwhile, outside the office, news of his rise continued to spread. Local newspapers picked up the story, highlighting how a man once overlooked for his background had risen to prominence through sheer grit and ability. Social media buzzed with reactions, ranging from admiration to disbelief. Some commenters praised the CEO for taking a chance on someone unconventional, while others questioned whether such stories were truly possible in today's competitive world. Regardless of opinions, one thing was clear: his journey had struck a chord with people everywhere. Despite the growing attention, he remained focused on his work. Fame wasn't what motivated him; making a difference was. Every morning he reminded himself why he had accepted this role in the first place: to create opportunities for others like him, people whose potential had been ignored because of stereotypes or circumstances beyond their control. That mission guided everything he did, from mentoring interns to spearheading diversity initiatives aimed at leveling the playing field. One of his proudest achievements came when he launched a scholarship program for students from underserved communities. Funded partly by the company and partly by donations from employees, the program provided financial aid and mentorship to young adults pursuing careers in global industries. At its launch event, he stood before a crowd of hopeful faces and shared his own story, not to boast, but to inspire. "If I can do it," he told them, "so can you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." By the end of his first year in the executive team, the company had undergone a remarkable transformation. Revenue from international markets had increased by over 40%, thanks largely to improved communication strategies and stronger partnerships. Employee satisfaction surveys showed record-high scores, with many citing the inclusive culture as a key factor in their happiness. And perhaps most importantly, the organization had become a model for other companies looking to embrace diversity and innovation. Yet despite all the accolades and accomplishments, the janitor-turned-executive never lost sight of his roots. On weekends, he still visited the neighborhood where he grew up, volunteering at community centers and libraries. He believed deeply in giving back, not just financially, but through time and effort. For him, success wasn't about climbing ladders. It was about lifting others up as you went. Looking ahead, he knew there was still work to be done. Breaking down systemic barriers wouldn't happen overnight, and there would always be skeptics resistant to change. But he faced the future with optimism, driven by the belief that progress was possible. One step, one conversation, one opportunity at a time. What started as a simple act of recognition had blossomed into a movement, proving that greatness can come from anywhere, and that true leadership lies in recognizing and nurturing potential, regardless of appearances. And so, his story continued to unfold, inspiring countless others to dream bigger, aim higher, and challenge the limits placed upon them. Little did he know, his legacy was only beginning to take shape. As the years rolled on, the janitor-turned-executive didn't just settle into his role, he thrived in it. His presence in the company became a cornerstone of its identity, shaping not only how it operated, but also how it was perceived by the world. What started as a single act of recognition from the CEO had snowballed into something far greater, a cultural shift that rippled through every corner of the organization. One of the most profound changes came in how the company approached hiring. Before his promotion, resumes were often judged based on degrees, prestigious internships, and polished references. Now, thanks to his influence, the leadership team began implementing blind recruitment processes. Resumes were stripped of identifying details like names, schools, or even previous job titles. Instead, candidates were evaluated purely on their skills and potential. This new system opened doors for people who might otherwise have been overlooked, people with raw talent, unconventional backgrounds, or untapped potential. The results spoke for themselves. The company hired individuals who brought fresh perspectives and innovative ideas to the table. One standout hire was a young man who had taught himself coding while working night shifts at a warehouse. Another was a woman who had run a small business from her home, but lacked formal qualifications. Both quickly proved themselves invaluable, contributing to projects that boosted efficiency and creativity across departments. But the janitor's impact extended beyond internal changes. As part of the executive team, he pushed for initiatives aimed at supporting underserved communities outside the company walls. He believed strongly that businesses had a responsibility to give back, not just through donations, but by creating real opportunities for growth and development. One of his proudest achievements was the launch of a mentorship program that paired employees with students from local schools. Volunteers spent weekends teaching kids everything from basic computer skills to public speaking, helping them build confidence and prepare for future careers. These efforts didn't go unnoticed. Media outlets continued to cover the company's transformation, highlighting its commitment to diversity and inclusion. Interviews with the janitor-turned-executive became frequent, and each time he spoke, his message remained consistent. Talent is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. We need to change that. His words resonated deeply, especially among marginalized groups who saw him as a beacon of hope. Social media lit up with stories of people sharing their own struggles, how they'd been told they weren't good enough because of where they came from, what they looked like, or what they didn't have. Many credited him with inspiring them to keep pushing forward despite the odds stacked against them. Despite all the praise, he remained humble. Fame wasn't what drove him. Making a tangible difference was. Every morning, he reminded himself of the countless hours he'd spent studying languages late into the night, determined to turn his passion into something meaningful. Those memories kept him grounded, reminding him that success wasn't about titles or recognition. It was about using your gifts to help others. Still, there were moments when the weight of his responsibilities felt overwhelming. Balancing his executive duties with his personal mission to uplift others was no easy task. There were days when he wondered if he was doing enough, if the changes he was championing were truly sustainable. But then he'd receive an email from a scholarship recipient thanking him for changing their life, or overhear an employee talking about how the new hiring process gave them a fair shot, and those doubts would fade away. One particularly memorable moment came during a global summit hosted by the company. Leaders from various industries gathered to discuss ways to promote diversity and inclusion worldwide. When it was his turn to speak, the room fell silent. Standing at the podium, he shared his journey, not as a way to boast, but to illustrate the power of giving people a chance. "I'm standing here today not because I'm special," he said, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "I'm standing here because someone decided to see me. Not my title, not my background, but me. That decision changed everything, and now it's our turn to do the same for others." The audience erupted into applause, many rising to their feet. It wasn't just his story that moved them. It was the universal truth behind it. Everyone deserves a fair shot, regardless of where they start. Back at the office, his colleagues began adopting this mindset more fully. Teams collaborated across departments, breaking down silos that had once hindered progress. Managers encouraged employees to take risks and think outside the box, knowing that innovation often came from unexpected places. Even the skeptics who had initially doubted him came around, realizing that embracing diversity wasn't just the right thing to do, it was smart business. Of course, challenges still arose. Not everyone agreed with the direction the company was taking. Some longtime clients expressed concern about the shift in priorities, fearing it might detract from profitability. Internally, a few executives grumbled about the extra effort required to implement inclusive practices. But the numbers told a different story. Under his leadership, the company not only maintained its financial success but exceeded expectations, proving that doing good and doing well weren't mutually exclusive. By the time he reached retirement age, the janitor turned executive had become a legend within the company and beyond. His name was synonymous with resilience, determination, and the belief that greatness can emerge from anywhere. Yet as much as he cherished the recognition, what mattered most to him was the legacy he left behind. On his final day, the entire office gathered to celebrate his contributions. Speeches were given, awards were presented, and heartfelt tributes poured in from colleagues and clients alike. But the highlight of the event came when a group of scholarship recipients took the stage. Each one shared how his support had changed their lives, opening doors they never thought possible. Tears welled up in his eyes as he listened, overwhelmed by gratitude, not for what he had achieved but for the ripple effect of his actions. After retiring, he dedicated his time to mentoring young professionals and advocating for systemic change. Through workshops, talks, and community programs, he continued to spread the message that potential knows no boundaries. His journey inspired countless others to challenge stereotypes, break barriers, and create opportunities for those who came after them. Looking back, he often reflected on how far he'd come, from mopping floors to leading a global corporation. But more than anything, he was proud of the path he had paved for others. He knew that true success wasn't measured by individual accomplishments. It was defined by the lives you touched along the way. And so, his story became more than just a tale of personal triumph. It became a call to action, urging everyone to look beyond appearances and recognize the hidden talents waiting to be discovered. Because in the end, greatness doesn't care about titles, backgrounds, or circumstances. It simply asks to be seen and given a chance to shine. Years after stepping down from his role as an executive, the janitor-turned-leader remained a guiding light for the company and the countless lives he had touched. His retirement wasn't the end of his journey. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he could focus entirely on giving back. Though no longer tied to boardroom meetings or corporate strategies, his influence continued to shape the world in ways that were both profound and lasting. One of the first things he did after leaving the company was establish a non-profit organization dedicated to helping people from underserved communities unlock their potential. The organization focused on three main pillars: education, mentorship, and access to resources. He believed deeply that everyone deserved a fair shot at success, regardless of where they came from or what challenges they faced. To him, it wasn't just about charity, it was about empowerment. The nonprofit quickly gained traction, attracting volunteers and donors who shared his vision. Schools partnered with the program to provide workshops on everything from language learning to career planning. Local businesses offered internships and job training opportunities to participants. Even former colleagues from the company joined in, lending their expertise and networks to support the cause. What started as a small initiative soon grew into a nationwide movement, touching thousands of lives. Among those impacted was a young woman who had grown up in a neighborhood much like the one he once called home. She had always dreamed of becoming a doctor, but felt her aspirations were out of reach due to financial struggles and lack of guidance. Through the nonprofit scholarship program, she received not only funding for her education, but also mentorship from professionals in the medical field. Years later, when she graduated at the top of her class, she credited him with changing the course of her life. Stories like hers became common, each one fueling his determination to keep pushing forward. He traveled across the country, speaking at schools, community centers, and conferences, sharing his story to inspire others. His message was simple yet powerful. Don't let anyone tell you what you can or cannot achieve. You have within you the power to rise above any obstacle. But he didn't stop there. Recognizing the importance of storytelling in driving change, he collaborated with filmmakers and writers to document the journeys of individuals who had overcome adversity to achieve greatness. These stories were turned into short films, books, and even a podcast series that reached millions of listeners worldwide. Each narrative highlighted the resilience and brilliance of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, reinforcing the idea that talent knows no boundaries. Back at the company he had once transformed, his legacy lived on in every corner of the building. New hires entered the workplace knowing his story, understanding that the organization valued merit over appearances. Employees continued to benefit from the inclusive policies and programs he had championed, ensuring that diversity remained a core part of its identity. The CEO who had taken a chance on him often reflected on how that single decision had reshaped not just the company, but the entire industry. He taught us all a lesson, the CEO said during a keynote speech years later. He showed us that leadership isn't about titles or positions. It's about seeing people for who they are and believing in their potential. Because when you give someone a chance, you never know how far they might go. As time went on, the janitor-turned-leader began receiving invitations to speak on global stages. From TED Talks to international summits, his voice reached audiences far beyond what he had ever imagined. Yet despite the accolades and recognition, he remained unchanged, still humble, still grounded, still driven by the belief that everyone deserves an opportunity to shine. During one such event, a young man approached him after his speech. Nervously, clutching a notebook, he introduced himself as someone who had been inspired by his story. "I'm working 2 jobs right now to pay my way through school," the young man explained. "It's hard, and sometimes I feel like giving up. But hearing your story makes me think maybe I can make it too." The retired executive smiled warmly and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You already are making it," he said, firmly. "Every step you take is proof of your strength. Keep going. You'll surprise yourself with how much you're capable of." Moments like these reminded him why he kept fighting even in retirement. It wasn't about fame or fortune, it was about connection, the kind that comes from recognizing shared humanity and lifting each other up. In his later years, he devoted more time to writing, penning a memoir that chronicled his journey from cleaning floors to leading a global corporation. The book became a bestseller, not because it was flashy or dramatic, but because it was honest. Readers saw themselves in his struggles and triumphs, finding hope in his unwavering belief that anything is possible if you refuse to give up. Through all the speeches, projects, and initiatives, one thing remained constant: his gratitude. He often said that none of his achievements would have been possible without the people who had supported him along the way. The grandmother who taught him Swahili, the friends who loaned him books, the CEO who took a chance on him, and the countless strangers who had shown kindness when he needed it most. "I didn't do this alone," he would say during interviews. "Every person I met, every experience I had shaped me into who I am today, and that's why I'll spend the rest of my life trying to pay it forward." By the time he passed away, his impact was immeasurable. Schools named scholarships after him. Companies adopted inclusive hiring practices inspired by his work, and generations of young people pursued their dreams with renewed confidence. His story became a testament to the power of opportunity, a reminder that greatness can come from anywhere, and true leadership lies in recognizing and nurturing potential. And so, his legacy endured, not just in the institutions he helped build, or the policies he influenced, but in the hearts of those whose lives he had changed. For every child who dared to dream bigger, every worker who refused to settle for less, and every leader who chose to see beyond appearances, his spirit lived on. Because in the end, His story wasn't just about one man's rise. It was about the ripple effect of believing in someone. It was about proving that when we open doors for others, we create a world where everyone has the chance to thrive. And that, he knew, was the greatest success of all.